Unit 8, From Colonies to Independence. In previous read-alouds, you learned about some of the first people from Europe who came to live in America. The people who came to live in the first permanent English settlement in America were called colonists, and they had a very difficult time after first arriving in America, and many of them died. The colonists and their leader, John Smith, made peace with the Powhatan Native Americans so that they could trade with the Powhatan for food. Do you remember where the first permanent English settlement in America was? It was in Jamestown, Virginia. Do you remember where the Pilgrims settled? It was in Plymouth, Massachusetts. During the next 100 years, many more people came to America from Europe and set up more colonies. In the unit you are about to begin, you will find out more about the colonies and who lived in them. In this first chapter, you will hear about the other colonies that were settled and what life was like for the people who lived in these colonies. Chapter 1: The 13 Colonies. Long ago, America was called the Colonies. Colonies are lands controlled by other countries that are far away. There were 13 colonies in America. Many of the people in the 13 colonies came from England, Wales, Scotland, and Ireland, though some came from France, Germany, and other European countries too. Colonies are places that are settled and controlled by people from another country. When countries or people are controlled, they do not make decisions for themselves about their laws or way of life. England was on the other side of the world in Europe. In the time you are about to read about, England was part of Great Britain, which also included Wales and Scotland. Great Britain was very far away from the 13 colonies. During this time period, traveling to the colonies from England and other countries in Europe took several weeks by boat. There were no airplanes, televisions, telephones, or internet, so communication was a challenge. A king or queen would have a lot of difficulties trying to rule a land that was about 3,500 miles away. The green area on the page represents the 13 colonies. Can you identify each of the colonies and read its name aloud? How many colonies were there in America? Where did the people who lived in the colonies come from? What was the name of one of the colonies? Generally, people living in the 13 colonies had traveled to America for a better life. Many thought of themselves as British, not as American. They liked to buy clothes and books from Great Britain. They liked to drink tea. They obeyed King George III, who ruled over England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, and the colonies in America. Tea is a drink made by steeping or soaking ground-up leaves of the tea plant in hot water. Tea does not grow in America, or even in England. In the colonist time, tea grew only in East Asia and had to be brought by ship first to England and then to America, so it was not easy to get. Even though tea was difficult to get and could be expensive, the colonists loved drinking it. That's a long list that King George III ruled over: England, Wales, Scotland, and Ireland, and the colonies. Great Britain at that time included England, Scotland, and Wales. Today, they are 4 countries: England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, and they make up the United Kingdom of Great Britain, or the UK for short. What did the colonists like to buy from Britain? Who was the ruler of the colonies? The colonists were proud of their king. Great Britain had just won a war against France, but to pay for that war, King George had borrowed a lot of money. Where could he find money to pay back what was borrowed? The answer was from the colonists in America. Colonists are people who live in a colony, or a place that is controlled by another country. Borrowed means took something and used it with the promise of returning it or replacing it later. Why did King George borrow money? Where did King George decide to get the money he owed and needed to pay back? The king and his parliament decided that when the colonists bought such things as sugar, paint, newspapers, writing paper, glass, or tea, they would be charged a payment, or sales tax, making the cost of these items more expensive. The colonists showed their anger by protesting and not buying any of these things. In the end, the tax on everything except tea was dropped. Parliament was the group of people who made laws for Britain. Sales tax is money that people pay in addition to the actual price of something when they buy it. In this case, the money collected from the sales tax charged by the king and Parliament would go to the British government. Sales tax still exists today, even in America. In most states, when someone buys something, they pay a little extra money for the sales tax. The money that is collected goes to the government of that state where they are making the purchase. The state then uses the tax money to pay for firefighters, police officers, schools, hospitals, and other things people need. Suppose that whenever you used your crayons to draw a picture in class, you had to pay a crayon tax of 1 penny. You will use the tax money to buy new crayons with more colors for everyone in the class to use. Is this a fair tax? Now, imagine that you still have to pay 1 penny, but this time the new crayons bought with your crayon tax will be given to a class in Britain. Is this fair? This is how the colonists felt. They didn't want money they paid in taxes to be used by the king and parliament all the way across the ocean. The meaning of the word dropped, as it's used in the last sentence on the page, doesn't mean let fall to the ground. It means to be removed or taken away. So he removed or took away the sales tax on everything except for tea. On what goods did the king and the British Parliament place a sales tax? How did the colonists show that they didn't like the tax? What happened after the colonists refused to buy anything with a sales tax? There is another story of life in the 13 colonies, though. Not everyone had gone there for a better life. Not everyone was free. Many Africans were enslaved and forced to travel to the colonies. Enslaved Africans worked on large plantations or farms growing crops. Their hard work helped to make the British colonies rich and strong. The enslaved Africans did hard work growing tobacco, but they had no rights or freedoms and did not get paid for their work. They were considered property instead of people. What did the enslaved Africans do? Why did some of the colonists want enslaved Africans? What did King George III and the British Parliament do that made the colonists angry?